Thank you all. Thank you all. Now, you got to be quiet because I've only got a few minutes to talk. So, look, it is so much fun to be here, always, to see Nina and to see Kenny, but mostly to see the kind of spirit holding, of Bioneers holding and growing. You know, we've sort of broken out of the beachhead and are claiming lots of ground. The Bioneers blazed the path, and now the settlers are following, you know, in all kinds of ways, and you can see it mounting up into real progress. I'm a connoisseur of kind of gloomy statistics, I fear, but the happiest statistic I know is something that the USDA said last year. It said that over the last 5 years, over the last half decade, for the first time in 150 years, there are more farms instead of fewer in the United States. That would not have happened. That would not have happened without all of you, and we can see what the contours of that emerging world are going to look like, of local food and local energy and local money, and it's gorgeous. And I can see it close up. I live in Vermont, you know, and it's one of the places like Northern California where this has gone right into the mainstream of things, and it's nothing I would rather do than stay at home and work on it. My last few books, like Deep Economy and things, have largely been about, I'm never home, almost ever. In fact, if I can make the slide come up, if I can make the last slide come up, there we go. We're about to leave on this 20 nights in 20 cities tour around the United States on a biodiesel bus, on Julia Butterfly Hill's old biodiesel bus. And I'm eager to go do it, but but truthfully, some part of me would much rather be at home. The reason that I'm not, and here's the part where I have to leave for a moment the kind of prevailing, wonderful, happy ethos of Bioneers. The reason I'm always on the move now is because we're losing. We're seeing those beautiful signs of progress sprouting up, but we're also seeing the thing that will keep them from prospering, will beat them back down, and that thing is the rapid physical degradation of this one planet that we have to live on. When I wrote The End of Nature 25 years ago almost now, you know, we knew things would be bad, but we did not realize how quickly and on what scale they would be bad. Now you can't help but know, just looking around. This summer, by the end of September, when the long Arctic night finally started to fall again and things froze, by this end of this summer, there was about 75% less ice by volume in the Arctic than there had been 40 years ago. We've taken one of the 4 or 5 great physical features on the Earth and broken it. And there are all kinds of other big physical features that we are doing the same thing to. Think about this ocean out our door here. The oceans are our metaphor for vastness, for bigness. 25 years ago, it did not occur to us that we could do any serious damage to the oceans. If you stick a pH strip out there in the Pacific now, it comes out a different color than it would have 30 years ago. That ocean is 30% more acid. The ocean researchers who gathered for the acidification conference down at San Diego a few weeks ago, the man who summed it up at the end, the scientist said, unless we turn things around, by the end of the century, our oceans will be hot, sour, and breathless, was how he put it. The atmosphere, because warm air holds more water vapor than cold, is 5% wetter than it was 40 years ago, which is a staggering change. It is the clearest sign that we have left the Holocene, this benign period of climatic stability that underwrote the rise of human civilization, and moved into something else, something much more dangerous. With that wetter atmosphere, we've loaded the dice for drought and for flood, and we've loaded the dice for the things that endanger even those beautiful successes that we've seen so far. Let me tell you firsthand, in Vermont, last September, we had the biggest rainstorm there's ever been in Vermont, and it washed away roads, and it washed away bridges, and it also washed away a whole bunch of our incredibly beautiful local organic farms all over the state. Those ones down on the river valley floors are many places now just rocks and sand, not the carefully tended, beautiful soils that had been there before. It's bad, and it will get much worse unless we do things very quickly. Everything that I've described comes from raising the temperature of the Earth 1 degree. That's how much we've done so far. The scientists are very clear that unless we get off coal and gas and oil far more quickly than any government now plans, that 1 degree will be 4 or 5 degrees before the century is out, and there is no reason to think that civilization can cope with that. The agronomists at Stanford in a study last year said, simply that rise in temperature, from this point on, each degree increase in global average temperature should cut grain yields around the world about 10%. If you watched the American Midwest this summer, you understood exactly how that could happen. It got too hot and too dry to grow corn on the most fertile soil in the entire planet this summer. This is by far the biggest thing that human beings have ever done, by far. And so if we are going to stop it, we need the biggest movement that we have ever mustered in order to try and slow it down. We are coming up in a couple of days, 5 days, on the 3rd anniversary of the first big action we did at 350.org that many of you helped with in the fall of 2009. We'd started some months earlier this organization somewhat quixotically, actually somewhat ludicrously. There was myself and 7 undergraduates at Middlebury College, where I hang out, and we were going to organize the globe. We had no money, we had no organization, but we had 7 young people, which is a good start. A good start in part because there are indeed 7 continents, and each one of them took one, you know, and we went to work, and our work was to spread out around the world and find people like ourselves, find people like you, and the good news is they are everywhere, everywhere. 2 days before our first big day of action, we got the sense that it might actually work. We were sitting around in our little borrowed office, all of us around a table, doing our work on our laptops, and the phone rang, and it was our leader in Ethiopia calling. Like many of our leaders, this one, a 17-year-old girl. And wow, and she was in tears, and she said, the government took away our permit for Saturday. We can't do it. We're going to do our demonstration today before they can stop us, which was brave. But the reason she was in tears, she just kept saying, we don't want to spoil this. We don't want to go ahead. We so wanted to do this with everybody else. We were so looking forward to being part of this big thing. We don't want to jump the gun. We're so sorry. And we have 10,000 young people out in the street in Addis Ababa right now. And so I was like, wow, it's okay, don't worry about the date, you know. We've hosted about 20,000 demonstrations in every country but North Korea. We thought the most important thing first was to spread this big educational net around the world to get people engaged. And I'm just going to flip through, we have 40,000 pictures in our Flickr account, and I'm just going to show you a few of these pictures from around the world, you know, of the things that people have done. Those are the religious leaders of South Africa, Muslim, indigenous, Anglican, you know, at the head of a huge multi-faith march. And that's our most important evangelical college in this country, where 5 or 6 years ago, people would have thought this was too pagan to engage in, but now they're involved and engaged. And that's because there's too many checkpoints in the way. That's Jordan, and Palestine and Israel activists collaborating. The things I want you to notice as I just flip through these pictures are that your brothers and sisters around the world do not look the way I've heard so many times that environmentalism is something that rich white people do, and if you had to worry where your next meal was coming from, you would not be an environmentalist. But that is not true. Most of the people we work with around the world are poor and black and brown and Asian and young, because that's what most of the world is made up of. And oddly, they are as interested in the future as anybody else. They're maybe more so, because if you're in some of these places, the future bears down on you with enormous speed. Look at that 0 there. Those are all women in full black burqa, okay? To us, they do not look like members of the Sierra Club, but their hearts and minds are in exactly that same place. They're not fixated on themselves. They're thinking about the future. You know, they're thinking about their kids and their kids' kids. And the same in every corner of the world. We did have, I must say, from that first day, 400 or 500 pictures in a file just labeled 350 adorable. And they were adorable. And they were also really, really beautiful and bittersweet to look at. That girl in the middle, those big eyes, always gets to me. So trusting. Chances are those 3 girls will be refugees before their lives are over. The country they live in, which is a 5,000-year-old culture, the highest point in that country is a couple of meters above sea level. And nothing they did caused any of it, obviously. So, I could literally show you these pictures for many, many, many days and not run out of them, and not run out of my sort of enthusiasm for them, because what they demonstrate is just this big, growing, surging sense that we have to do something, that our leaders are not getting the job done, and so we're going to have to do it. And as this movement builds and spreads, as it gets involved, that's 3,000 people making an image of King Canute holding back the oceans, they're bright. And we do art projects so large now that we need satellites to, capture how, what it looks like, and just amazing stuff. But once you have movements, you got to do something with them, okay? It's not enough just to know what the problem is and tell. Power doesn't yield easily, it turns out. If it did, we would have won this fight long ago. For 2 decades, scientists and economists and everybody else have been saying, here's what we need to do. We need to put a price on carbon. We need to quickly move towards renewable energy. We need to do it fast because we have no other choice. And it has not worked. It has not worked because the power of the fossil fuel industry is so great. This is the richest thing that there ever was. Exxon made more money last year than any company in the history of money, okay? And so they will not surrender that easily. They will not agree to become like everybody else and have to pay to put out their waste. They know that their profits depend on the fact that they're allowed to pour carbon into the atmosphere for free. And so we need to stand up in new ways, and we're starting to do that. Last year, with the help of many of you, we took on this pipeline down out of Canada to the Gulf of Mexico. And we asked people to come to Washington and get arrested, and people responded. There were 1,253 of us who went to jail. It was the biggest civil disobedience action in 30 years in this country. And pretty soon, people were doing the same thing in Canada, and they were doing the same thing all over the world at consulates and embassies. And then we went back to the White House, and we circled it 5 deep with people standing shoulder to shoulder. And we weren't attacking. Every sign that was there was just a quote from President Obama in his 2008 campaign, time to end the tyranny of oil. And 4 days later, the president said, okay, we'll take a year. and study this harder. Now, that's a temporary win. That's the only kind of win environmentalists ever get. And this one may be more temporary than most because the oil industry has fought back with everything that they have. They don't like to lose even a little bit. And we'll find out if the president wins re-election, whether it was a cynical announcement or a kind of canny one. We're going to have to make sure, do everything we can to make sure that they really do the right thing, in part because, as Jim Hansen at NASA said last year, burn that stuff in the tar sands on top of everything else we're burning, and it's game over for the climate. That is the second biggest pool of carbon on Earth. If we burned all the economically recoverable oil up there, we would burn more carbon than human civilization has yet burned. So it's a big deal. And it was really good to see that we could stand up to the fossil fuel industry when we came together. That though we lacked money, we could find other currencies, passion and spirit and creativity, that people were willing to spend their bodies too, to make. That was really good to see. The tough part, of course, is in realizing that there are 50 other things like those tar sands around the world. And we cannot stop global warming in the time that physics and chemistry allow us, one pipeline at a time, or one coal mine at a time, or one anything at a time. We need to go straight at that industry. We need to go straight at it as hard as we can. And that's what we're now going to try to do. I wrote this piece for Rolling Stone this summer, and it was funny. I got a call from the editor a few days later. He said, "This is very strange. Justin Bieber was on the cover, but your article got 10 times more likes on Facebook. So what's going on with that?" The reason that it's not to do with the writing, it's to do with the fact that it allows us to, the math in that article allows us to kind of see the future. The world has agreed, the only thing that it's agreed about climate change is that 2 degrees rise would be too much. Everybody has signed off on that, even the US, okay? And that's obviously a very conservative figure. It's much too high. 1 degree melts the Arctic. We don't want to find out what 2 degrees does, but it's the only thing the world's agreed on. The second piece of math in that article was that we know how much more carbon roughly we can put out into the atmosphere and have any hope of staying below 2 degrees. It's about 560 more gigatons, 560 more billion tons more. That sounds like a lot, but at the rate at which we're currently burning things, that'll give us about 15 years before we blow past that threshold. But that's not the scary number. The scary number was the third one. A group of financial analysts in the UK added up how much carbon all the fossil fuel companies in the world had, and the number they came out with was about 2,800 gigatons in their reserves, okay? That coal and gas and oil is still below the ground, but economically, it's above the ground. It's what makes the share price for Exxon. When Peabody Coal goes to borrow money from the bank, it's what they use as collateral. There's no longer, in other words, any room for wishful thinking or doubt or speculation on our current course unless we intervene decisively. We will blow past so badly any sort of even half-sane physical limit on this planet that we will have no chance of building the kind of world that we want. We'll just be dealing with nothing but emergency response from here on in. And so, the time has come to take straight on that industry. That math makes clear that the fossil fuel industry, despite its riches, despite its power, is a rogue industry. It makes clear that they are outlaws, not against the laws of the state, because they get to write those, but outlaws against the laws of physics. And that's a more serious, in the end, law to be violating. So here's how it works, We're going to go to work the night after the election on this road show all over the country. Lots of my friends coming along for various parts, Naomi Klein and, all sorts of people there to help. And it's going to be great. But its design is to launch a thousand movements all over the country. We're going to be trying and build a divestment movement on college campuses, like the one that helped bring down apartheid. You know, when Nelson Mandela, when he got out of prison, his first trip was to the U.S., and he did not come to the White House. He came to Berkeley to thank students and trustees at the University of California. They had divested $3 billion worth of stock in companies like GE and things that were invested in South Africa, and Mandela said this was a huge help. Desmond Tutu, one of our great friends at 350, cut this great piece of video for us that we'll be showing that just says, we got to do it again. This is the moral crisis of our time. And if you have any doubts about that moral crisis, you know, just look at the faces of, we did another one of these big days of action this year, and it was all people around the world who had already felt the sting of climate change. We called it Connect the Dots, and in thousands of places where there are other things going on, you know, like Afghanistan. But you know what? The river dwindling in Kabul, that's as big a deal as anything else for people who live there. These are your brothers and sisters, and they are in such trouble. They can't deal with the world that is coming at them. Rising oceans and falling, that top balloon, that's where the top of the Dead Sea, that's where the water level was 40 years ago, okay? That picture just killed me. It comes from some anonymous village someplace in the middle of India. I have no idea how they found out what we were doing, but the note that came with it just said, there is no water behind our dam anymore, you know? I don't know how to respond to that. I don't, you know, because there's nothing that people in those places can do they don't burn enough carbon to make a difference in this fight. They can't do anything except suffer and help, try to join with us. And so we have to join with them wherever we can. That's the message that, well, if you can see those people standing in the swollen, dirty stream in Haiti, just look at those two signs. It just says, your actions affect me. That's the message that's got to somehow get in our hearts. And if it does, then we need you joining us in this fight all over the world. Only come, though, to this roadshow and to these events if you're willing to really dig in to this fight, because it is going to be a fight. And we're going to do it peacefully, and we're going to do it civilly, and we're going to follow the great example of our predecessors like Dr. King, but we are going to fight. When we asked people to come get arrested in D.C., there were two things that were interesting to me. One was, I said when we sent out the letter, I don't think young people should have to be the only cannon fodder here, okay? If you're 20 right now, maybe in our economy an arrest record is not the absolute best thing you could possibly have. One of the few unmixed blessings of growing older is that past a certain point, what the hell are they going to do to you, you know? And so it was with great pleasure that I watched a lot of people with hairlines like mine, descend on Washington. We did not ask people, how old are you? That would be rude, but we did cleverly say, who was president when you were born? And the two biggest cohorts had been born in the FDR and the Truman administrations, okay? So young people, your elders are starting to step up now in this fight, which is what we need. The second thing we asked people was, if you'll come, would you please wear a necktie or a dress when you come? Now, I live in Vermont, neckties are basically for funerals, but we wanted to make a visual point, and it's an important point, which is that none of the things we're asking for are radical here. We're asking for a world a little bit like the one we were born onto, the one that's worked for the last 10,000 years. Nothing, maybe that's even an almost conservative request. Radicals work at oil companies. If you are willing to get up in the morning and amass an enormous fortune altering the chemical composition of the atmosphere, then you are engaged in an act more radical than any human before you, and it is our job to stand up to that, to break that kind of radicalism before they break the planet. And all I can tell you is, I don't know for sure that we're going to win this fight, but I know that we're going to fight it. I know that we're going to fight it. And when I look at people all over the world now engaged in this, and when I look at all of you and know all that you've managed to do over these last years, some part of me really likes our odds. Thank you guys so much.